You're listening to SM Media. Welcome, folks, to your latest episode of the Celtic Report, your SM Media podcast for all things Celtic. I'm Scott McPike. It is always an absolute pleasure to be your host. We haven't had a podcast since the Rangers game. Obviously, there's been a lot happening in the outside world in terms of kind of other things, but we are back. And I thought instead of doing like a roundup of all the matches, we'd have been here all day with them kind of high and low and things like that. I thought, right, let's just open the floor to some questions. It's an international break. There's not a lot of Celtic action. There's a lot to kind of get through. We did get a lot of questions, and it's a pleasure to join me to answer some of these questions. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the show Michael Shearer.
Great to be back on the show. It's been an exciting start to the season for Celtic, to say the least.
It absolutely has, and we've got a lot of different subjects to focus on here in terms of kind of different questions. Let's start with the first one. This is one that I think is probably the best one that's coming through. Have you been surprised with the upturn in form of Nicholas Kuhn?
I've been quite surprised. I suppose when you looked at pre-season, he was playing well in pre-season, but that doesn't always mean that you're going to play well at the start of the competitive season. The level he's playing at is a very high level. You compare it to maybe Jota, when you look at that impact he's having with the goals and the assists. Some wingers maybe just get the assists and not many goals, whereas he's able to get both. And it's interesting to see that he is a winger who looks to cut inside, but he's also got that ability to get down the outside. He's added new dimensions to his game. I feel like maybe we judged him too soon last season, and maybe it was quite comical with a dental issue. Some people would have probably looked at that and says, "Oh, you could have played through that." But it clearly had an impact on him, even on his pace as well. He's looked a lot sharper. Him and Alistair Johnson, I feel like you don't see Alistair Johnson get to this next level if it's not for Nicholas Kuhn. Those two have linked up so well. That's probably Brendan Rodgers, and looking and getting a winger who likes to invert on the fullback, going down the outside at times. That's an adaptation that's really worked well since the beginning of the season. So for me with Nicholas Kuhn, there's been some surprise, but I guess when you look at that performance, in particular against Man City in America, that was really quite a standout. And I know it wasn't the full Man City team, but at the same time that you want to see something from these players like him and Palma, who hadn't done so much last season towards the end of the year, and that's who you would compare him against, him and Palma. You look at the differences with what they've done since the beginning of the season. Kuhn's been unplayable, whereas Palma's just looked out of sorts, and I guess that's more a mentality thing to kind of turn things around. When you look at James Forrest last season, he was incredible towards the end of the season, but that's on Kuhn for taking him out of the team, and just He's been unbelievable, maybe with the exception of the Dortmund game, week in, week out. Even at times off the bench, he's the difference maker. In the League Cup when he comes on against Falkirk, if it's not for him, arguably, I don't know if Celtic go through.
No, I think it's fair. I think as well, one thing that has really caught my eye is how much more physical he looks. Like, and is that down to building up a kind of partnership with Johnson? Is it down to, as you say, maybe feeling a bit better in himself? Like, because I don't think, well, you mentioned obviously the dental thing. I don't think that can go underestimated. If you're not feeling right physically, you're not going to be as physical, and you're kind of, do you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to put yourself about as much. You're not going to be eager to kind of try and win the ball back if you lose it. Once that's been eliminated from his system, I don't think it's a coincidence that he looks a lot more tenacious. And 6 goals, 8 assists. I think the goals are impressive, but the contributions he's making to his teammates as well, I don't think we can ignore that. I think he's been the best player this season.
Probably. In all honesty, you can't argue with those stats. I know some people don't like to focus too much on statistics, but it's unbelievable for a winger as well. He's quite left-footed, but to get those numbers, you look at maybe a player like Iron Robin, who like to cut inside onto their strong foot. Kuhn's got a wee bit more flexibility. He likes to go down the outside as well at times. So for me, he's just been unplayable. It's unbelievable to see a player go for someone who's been displaced by a 30-plus-year-old James Forrest to this season. And it's kind of what we were wanting at Celtic. We're wanting a wee bit more creativity, dynamism in that wide area. You lose Jota, and then you bring in a host of wingers, and they don't really live up to that standard. Whereas you can maybe start to compare Kun and Jota now and see, can Kun go to that level that Jota seemed to go to when he became unplayable, and it led to that £25 million move. So
Yeah.
that's the question now. Can he go to that level? I'm not saying I want him to leave the club, but you want to just see that progression. So for me, he's getting very well into that level, and he's an early contender for Player of the Season. It's very early to start making those accusations, but come the end of the season, he might very well be up there for Celtic Player of the Year and even PFA Player of the Year.
And this is another thing as well, and I think we will bring this up later on because there's a few players that are maybe still at that kind of stage as well where they just need more time to develop. But like, if you'd said in the summer Nicholas Kuhn was going to be the kind of key player so far, I think a lot of fans had already made their mind up. Are fans too quick to make their judgment? Like, to me,
It's
that's always a theme with players like Kuhn.
It's always hard to say because for every Nicholas Kuhn, there's a Mikey Johnson.
Yeah.
There's levels of delusionalism when it comes to a player. Maybe people want to see them turn it around because they had that homegrown aspect, whereas someone like Kuhn. But then I guess what you look at is you look at players like Yang, Marco Tilio, who've maybe failed to make the grade, and then people make their mind up so quick about players like that, and it has a negative effect on Kuhn over the end of last season. So I guess that's why these instances happen. With Celtic, you like to look to hit the ground running, but it's great to see a player turn that around after a good pre-season. And I guess that's down to Rodgers and the coaching staff, Kennedy, etc., and making this player just look unplayable. He's still quite young as well, so
Yeah.
he's got a great career ahead of him at Celtic in the coming years, and it'll just be very exciting to see just how good a level he can get to. Can he get to that unplayable level that Kyogo is at times, that Callum McGregor can be? So, and bottom of those players, it will show you that you can achieve that level. But the question is, in Europe, will he be able to get goals and assists? Because it's okay doing it against Slovan Bratislava, but I guess against Dortmund, everything was going against Celtic. Dortmund were so on top, and you can't really expect a winger to win that game on his own when Dortmund just look to be scoring every time they go forward. So, in my point of view, maybe I was a bit harsh watching him in the game and thinking that he's not really doing much. But then you look at all the players around him, the system that was brought into that game, it makes it tough for him.
Next question: is Greg Taylor's early season form worthy of a new deal, or is it time to move on from Taylor? I think that's an interesting one because I don't think anybody can disagree. He has looked great so far this season, but he's also coming to the end of that deal, and I think fans are very much can he, because I think the thought was in the summer Celtic need an upgrade in Greg Taylor, and now we're sitting in October and saying Greg Taylor's probably one of the best players of the season so far. So again, it kind of shows this kind of weird situation where I think a lot of people think he does need upgraded, but also you can't look at his form and not go, he's been excellent so far and does deserve a new deal. Where are you at here?
I guess it's quite complicated to look at this one because for me, Greg Taylor at the top level in the Champions League, he gets caught out. And then you look at Greg Taylor in Glasgow derbies, he's really quite a star against Rangers on the ball. For me, he lacks that athleticism to play at the very top level. And if Celtic want to make a mark in European football, you look at that mistake he makes against Slovan Bratislava, it really does come out of nowhere. But then you look at some of his performances domestically, he's excellent when he inverts. Rodgers is adapted to that. But then, Scott, I guess we look at that picture that's come up in the coming days with Kieran Tierney and Brendan Rodgers at the Celtic Foundation.
Yeah.
And for me, journalism, media, PR, it's not a coincidence that photo pops up at the Celtic Foundation in London, Kieran Tierney speaking to Rodgers. So for me, if Celtic want to get better, you upgrade Greg Taylor, but at the same time, Greg Taylor is at a higher level than Anthony Ralston is as a fullback over the other side, so he definitely deserves a new contract. And then the next question is, how do you upgrade in that position? Is it going to be Alex Villay? Is he going to get to that level? Or are you going to look to get a Kieran Tierney in January or the summer on a free transfer? So for me, you give him a new deal and you keep him on the side for the rest of the season. Celtic could still get by probably winning the league with Greg Taylor, of course. I don't think anybody would contest that. He's been excellent in big games domestically. But when it comes to European football, he looks like a player that just... Sometimes he just looks out of sorts, because when you look at these wingers, they possess world-class pace and technical ability in 1v1 situations, and you leave Greg Taylor 1v1 at times Diza Maida does track back, but when he gets exploited, Greg Taylor, he kind of looks out of sorts when he's on the ball. He sometimes looks to go backwards, sidewards. The pressure gets to him when he come up against these world class players, and it's easy. It's easy enough for him to do it against certain oppositions, but when he's really, really tested, he's quite a player that he looks at fault. And Liam Scales would get criticism, but for me, Liam Scales does thrive in some defensive situations when it comes to defending your box, whereas Greg Taylor looks a bit more uncomfortable at times.
Where you made a Valley so far, because like I think he kind of get through into the deep end against Dortmund when he came on at half time, and obviously he's kind of come in for Taylor, who's been injured. But to me, Valley looks very much a case of like he looks to be. If you'd not told me he was from Barcelona, you could probably tell straight away. He looks like been brought through from the kind of Barcelona academy. He looks to have that kind of drive and athleticism going forward, and he looks a very good passer.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to judge so early, given he made his debut against Falkirk, and that was quite a tough situation with that back four getting changed that day. It was kind of all over the place. Then you look at him against Dortmund, getting brought on at half time. He didn't look bad at all. He possesses quite a lot of pace, athleticism, sort of aspects to your game that Greg Taylor doesn't have. He seems to have. It's hard to judge where he could do that consistently, because it's all well having talent, but at Celtic it's about the consistency week in, week out. But having come through the Barcelona Youth Academy, his performances in pre-season against Real Madrid, when he was actually shoved out onto the right wing, and what he was able to do there, he's certainly impressed. And the challenge for him will be changing that adaptation, because at times I've seen him inverting, and I don't think he would have done a lot of that at Barcelona.
No.
Slightly different style of play, looking to overlap, so that's the challenge for him. But when you look at Alistair Johnson, he's kind of been the opposite of that. He's went for someone who was inverting to who's maybe overlapped more than they were previously doing. So with Valet, it's the opposite of that. He's going for being someone who overlaps to now inverting. So that'll be the challenge. But for me, he looked good against Ross County as well. He's quite a competent defender, and it's a sort of situation where if he really breaks into this side and takes Greg Taylor out of the team, Celtic would really want to nail him down, but it's far too early to make that judgment quite yet. But there has been a lot of promising signs so far, and when you get a fullback on loan for Barcelona, this is exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for him to fit into the side, and specifically against Dortmund at half time, to get flung into that situation. He done pretty well. I know the final score line, but it certainly wasn't his fault for the majority of the goals or anything at all. So he's definitely got pass marks at this stage of the season.
Right, this is kind of a double question, because last season's recruitment just a case of how you don't let a recruitment manager pick instead of the manager. And those players that kind of were brought in last summer, the likes of Nawrocki, Odenholm, Palmer, Yang, do they all have a chance at Celtic, or is it time to just cut ties? It's quite a difficult one, because
it's a difficult question, isn't it, to really think about? Because any player can turn it round at any time, and I don't want to write them off because they play for Celtic at the end of the day.
I think last summer, I think it was a case of, I think the recruitment team looked at the squad and thought, there's not really many positions that really need addressed. But Jota was probably the only one you would look at.
Mm-hmm.
But then you brought in a lot of players in terms of like a lot of project players, as we call it. Nawrocki, I think, would probably not be classified as a project player, because I think he was a Starfeld replacement. But Holm, Palmer, Yang, they haven't really hit the ground running. Where are you at with them? In terms of the four of them individually, where are you at with them?
I look at Stephen Welsh. I think Nawrocki is still better than Stephen Welsh. That's my maybe unpopular opinion. I think sometimes Stephen Welsh can be quite a bomb scare in defence. Whereas the only real terrible game I hadn't seen Nawrocki have was against Aberdeen away, and that was against Miovski 1v1, and Miovski's pretty good in that situation in the counter attack. And I'm not going to say he's probably about fourth or fifth choice at the heart of defence, and for me he's up against Welsh and Trusty, and Trusty's looked okay domestically, whereas in European football not so much. Palma, he always has those moments of brilliance that you look back to last season in the Champions League, but he can't live off them. Mm-hmm. He's an un-Celtic player in some ways, that he's social media PR. You don't get so much of that at Celtic these days. Rodgers sort of looked to take that out with Haksabanovic when he was making rumblings. When Rodgers joined, you don't see a lot of Celtic players doing that. But with Palma, I hope he's kind of knuckling down. There's been rumours he has, but he journalist in his homeland, Honduras, making rumblings about he might leave Celtic in January, but apparently that's not happening now. So for me with Palma, he could if he wants to, but it's about attitude and learning for the coaching staff. Like he knows what he wants to do when he gets the ball, but there's coaches there that can make him a better player, and his decision making at times is very poor, and it's quite selfish and looking to just cut inside, even when there's space down the outside. And when you're playing against these domestic teams who want to camp so deep, there is space in the wide areas at times to link up with whether it be attacking midfielders, fullbacks, and he doesn't seem to recognise that. So it's about his attitude and knuckling down, and getting that hat trick during the week will be good for his confidence, but he needs to build on that. And when you look at players like Yang looks to be ahead of him in the pecking order right now. He comes off the bench and he has positive signs, but for me, Yang isn't a great. He's never going to be a great goal scorer. He's maybe a creative winger, and that's all he's ever going to be. He's got that little trick in him; he can beat a man, but he does look quite off the level. Whereas Palma has hit that standard and then he's fell away for it. Whereas I've never really thought Yang was ever at that level to be starting week in, week out. Odin Thiago home, we've not seen anything.
Flew out of the picture, isn't he?
And considering how young he was when he joined, how many appearances he's made in his homeland, to fall so badly away, it's incredible to see that a player's just completely out of the picture. And even with Awata leaving, you think Awata leaves and that opens another door for him, and it's just simply not. And with Callum McGregor retiring for international duty, he's going to play probably a couple of extra games, which seems unbelievable to think if he doesn't pick up those injuries. But with Thiago home, I really don't see where he goes for here, in all honesty. I don't know about yourself, but he had those promising signs when he maybe played deeper, but he doesn't look like he's going to break into even the bench at times. You look at young Francis Turley, he seems to be getting more opportunities. And with Kelly leaving the club, Kelly moving to Millwall, Turley takes that opportunity and home just kind of falls out of the picture again. So it's that summer that we're all going to look back to, Brendan Rodgers' first summer, and that recruitment, it's just... Clearly Rodgers didn't have very much to do with it, and it wasn't his sort of players. It was project signings. It was power in numbers, but not in quality. Those players, and the real question with that is when you add up all their transfer fees together, it's a considerable sum when you put all the players together that they spent. It's maybe 1 or 2 million on each player, but at the same time, other clubs in Scotland wouldn't be afforded that luxury. And for Celtic to waste that money, it's not great to see.
I think with Nawrocki, I just don't think he's a Brendan Rodgers defender. I don't think I think the best way to describe it, whatever Brendan Rodgers looks for, I think there's something there that he doesn't have. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is, because he's never really... I've never looked at Nawrocki and thought, you've had a terrible game. Like, maybe the one game was that Miovski game, but...
Injuries, I think, as well, at the same time.
Like, Lagerbielke was another one where I just felt like... I think he made up his mind so early that it was just like, you're never really getting in here. And as you say, when you go back to like Stephen Welsh, I think Holmes so far out the picture, like as we'll kind of get on to later, I think McGregor plays and it's 2 or 4 of like Hatate, Engels, McCowan and Bernardo. I don't see where he fits. I think there is that kind of, there is maybe somebody in there that McGregor can be rotated, but as you say, I think he will play a lot more now that he's not playing international. And it looks to me to be 2 of the 4.
You look at that quality of depth as well. I would say maybe they're losing O'Reilly, who's a starter, but then the depth off the bench. You look at a player like Luke McCowan, he brings a great attitude. And for me, I think Luke McCowan could be a player that over the years, if he progresses at Celtic, he could play anywhere in that midfield.
He just reminds me so much of Ryan Christie, not in terms of a player, but just that kind of journey. I wouldn't be surprised if you see him get wee spells and then Rodgers turns him and say, right, go out and loan somewhere and then come back and you see him kick on. Might be something like that, or he might do it differently. He might get the chance and things, but I think Yang, he's never really stood to me. Palmer's got the stats. Palmer's stats last season are actually pretty good. I think it was 9...
Up until Christmas they were, and then they kind of just fell off a cliff. So it was brilliant if you look at it over a season, but then it was in such a short period of time, from maybe September up to December, maybe mid-December.
Remember the St Mirren game, Hart gets sent off. He was outstanding in that game, and then that was kind of him.
I know it's very hard to judge with Palmer because he's clearly not listening to a lot of the coaching he's been given, And you look at a lot of times he's been subbed at half time when he started games, and that's a real problem for a
Hmm.
winger like that. But then it's up to Brendan Rodgers, I guess, and there's only so much he can do as a manager. When you look at Maeda and his attitude, it's the complete opposite.
Yeah,
Maeda's given absolutely everything on the pitch, whereas you look at Palma, how many games have you watched him and you think he's given his absolute all for the team?
that's it.
He's putting himself before the team at the end of the day. And when you play for a team like Celtic, you've got to work together.
You absolutely summed it up perfectly there. He's probably a better technical player than Maeda, but
Mm-hmm.
Maeda's work rate is just 20 times is more
And
important.
Maeda's improved as a player. When you look
Yeah,
at his goal scoring, a lot of the
yeah.
goals he's getting, his finishing certainly improved. Maybe technically he's improved a little bit, not a great amount, but for me, he's just given everything for the team. And when you have a player like that, any manager in the world would want a Dyson Maeda in the team with that attitude because it sets the standard for the front all the way back.
Let's stick with Maeda because this question came in. Is Maeda in the best form of his time at Celtic at the moment?
Yes, definitely, by far. Maeda was quite a frustrating player at times, but then he gets that big injury and he's out for a consistent period of time. And Celtic's season kind of fell off the cliff at a stage last year, and he comes back in. It's no coincidence. And then he gets another injury, and he comes back in an unbelievable time frame to play against Rangers. And when he gets that goal against Rangers at Ibrox last season, that's when people maybe I think start to take notice of just what this player brings to the team. Ibrox away, I think Rangers had quite a lot of momentum at that stage. Before that game at Ibrox, you forget that Rangers are really maybe just favourites at that point, and he gets that goal so early in the
Yeah.
game. Time and time again, he's frightening James Tavernier for Rangers, and he's finally getting that credit for what he's bringing to the side. He's the challenge with him was just getting that consistency as well. And that's the hardest part, I think, of being a football player. Consistently, week in, week out. And he's getting that. He might not always get a goal and assist every week, but
Mhm.
he's certainly took his game up a level. And I guess the question with Dyson Maeda is over the next couple of years, where does his career go? He's still young enough that he could make that big move and he could go into the Premier League. So it's just that technical part of his game he could maybe improve, but every other aspect of his game is certainly unbelievable. And even his pressing, I would say, is world class. And for Rodgers to say that means a lot.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair. I think as you say, he's work rate I have never ever doubted, but I think just this, you see, he's adding a lot more goals to his game. I think that front three, I looked at Kun, Kyogo, and Maeda, and just think they complement each other so well. Well, they all do different things brilliantly.
Yeah, it's especially the pressing as well. I think
Yeah,
that when you look at Kuhn, he's probably looked at Maeda and thought he maybe won't get to the same level because Maeda's
yeah,
sort of superhuman in some aspects, whereas Kyogo's always pressed at a great level and
mhm,
Kuhn's had to up his game, and certainly the stats reflect that. And with those front three, they've certainly just found that balance. And
yeah,
sometimes you just put maybe three players, and whether it be the back four or the midfield three or the front three, and it just works.
mhm,
I remember thinking back to like Aguero, Sane, and Sterling. It just sort of worked at one stage for them at Man City, and
yeah,
it's been the exact same with Kun in that. And with the rest of these players, everybody's sort of thinking, can they get into the team? Idas, etc., Yangs, but that it's sometimes you just need that combination, that familiarity with a player. And with those front three, they all bring different things to their game. Maeda's more the hard-working winger, whereas Kuhn's the more the creator who's able to pick that pass. Maeda's not so much that sort of player, but he's more able to get maybe a goal out of nowhere, whereas Kuhn's more about the dribbling. Maeda struggles in that aspect. So you're sort of compensating in each side with wingers with different abilities. And then with Kyogo, him and Maeda's always worked well. But then Kuhn and Kyogo works brilliantly. Kuhn's able to play that final third pass anywhere to Kyogo. He seems to identify those runs,
yeah.
and not a lot of wingers have that ability to play that final pass that cuts through the defence when Celtic play. I remember last season, even when Kuhn was still clearly suffering for that dental issue, he played a pass against Kyogo at Celtic Park over the defence, and Kyogo was able to get a header. And you think how much time and space Kyogo must have had with that pass for him to score a header against quite a physical opposition in Scottish football. So for me, that front three is it's arguably as good as Celtic have maybe had over the past decade. And it's just, can they keep that consistently over the season, keep them fit? And if they play like this, they're going to keep everybody else out of the team, even Ida, who's for the fee they paid.
Next question. With the big money outlay, is it fair to say that Engels and Adamida have not had the start that many have envisioned? I think this is quite a.
Harsh, I would say, in
I
all
would say it's
honesty.
quite harsh, but Engels to me, I think, like, it's a big. I thought against like Slovan Bratislava. I thought Hearts as well. He was really good. I don't think he should have played against Dortmund. I think he should. I don't think he should have started. To me, I was astonished that Tati didn't start. Like,
I don't know. I would have probably started him and Hatate because I think Bernardo was playing great, and I probably would have played him. But then you watch him in the game, Hatate brings a different factor. But it's not Arne Engel's fault that Celtic lost the game at Dortmund. I think that's a greater issue, and maybe we'll touch on that later in the show when
yeah,
it comes to the system and that. But you can't really pick one player against a pretty good Dortmund side that got to the Champions League final,
well,
albeit a little,
I thought he was excellent against Bratislava. I thought he was the best player in the park against Bratislava.
especially with that he can take a penalty. I think that's
Yeah,
quite an underrated
yeah,
thing at Celtic. Celtic get a lot of penalties, but their conversion rate's never
no,
historically been great. And he's clearly got that instinct to kind of take the goalkeeper the wrong way. You see the Hearts players antagonise them before he takes the penalty. He's very physical as well. Celtic needed quite a physical player in the middle of the park who brings that. But Dortmund, he did look out of his depth. So I guess there's two ways of looking at it. He was unbelievable against Slovan Bratislava, whereas against Dortmund he looked out of his depth. So I would maybe look to judge him over the next couple of Champions League
yeah,
games. Domestically, he wasn't really finding his feet in against Ross County. He gets substituted, and that's fair. But you can't expect a player to be a 9 out of 10 every week. That's very hard to ask at Celtic. So for me to write him off would be crazy, and I'm sure you agree. He's shown enough signs that he's going to be a great player. He's
yeah,
still pretty young considering what he'd done in the Bundesliga, and in the middle of the park, it's quite competitive at Celtic. And it's quite good to see that there's players like McCowan that can come in and replace him against Ross County and make the difference. Because I don't really think Celtic had it to that extent. So just give him time. And with Adam Ida as well, it's harsh to judge Adam Ida. Sometimes he has that game where he comes off the bench and he changes the game. I guess the question is, will he'll be happy enough with that at this stage of his career? But I guess it's the longer it goes on, will he be happy being on the bench for a consistent number of years with Kyogo? Because I don't see him becoming the first choice striker immediately.
no.
But that's nothing against him. He's a younger striker than Kyogo. He's still learning. He's going to become a greater player under Rodgers. He brings a different dynamic. You look at him, he comes off the bench against Slovan Bratislava and he gets a goal at the Champions League. That's a big thing for his confidence to get a Champions League
You
goal.
mentioned that Falkirk game as well. He turns that. Do you know what I mean? Like, he scores the goals needed there. Do
It's
you know what I
it's
mean? Like,
it's really harsh to sort of judge these players because
yeah,
if another player's playing at such a high level and they're on the team, that doesn't mean they're bad necessarily. It just means they need to raise their game to another level. And it's great to have two players like them, maybe possibly on the bench, that if other players that have started the game are out of sorts, they can come on and change the game. So the squad depth at Celtic's pretty excellent in most positions. So for me, the outlay is a lot greater than it has been on Ida and Engels compared to previous years. But that doesn't mean they're going to flop. In all honesty, it just means that they'll need more time because they're younger. That's why their value is greater, because they're younger players that have shown glimpses of brilliance, and all they need to do is do that consistently over a number of years. So I'm pretty positive about them. I wouldn't write them off after a couple of poor games at all.
no, I wouldn't either. I do think though it is hard when you're spending that amount of money. You're expecting, as you say, remarkable performance every game. That's not going to happen. And we say that they are still very young. Like, you look at Engels, for example, it's a very different climate. Ida, I think the one thing we does is that I would put my money in Ida scoring a big goal in a big game before most players in that team. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, done that last season. Again, the game against Motherwell, the cup final, comes up big. The third goal against Rangers in that 3-3 draw. Again, it will take time, but I think I wouldn't say they've had a bad start. I don't think they've had the electric start that I think their money would say. But I think that, again, is that folk being too critical? And again, that leads to the next question: are the fans too harsh on Liam Scales?
Definitely, I think Liam Scales at times has really risen his game to another level. I wasn't a big fan of him at first, and I think you can imagine, given his career at Aberdeen on loan, that loss to Darvo, getting sent off, I think it was against Hibernian, and then coming to Celtic. But he's built that confidence over the space of a year. I think it's been just around a year he's been in the first team picture. The amount of games he's played consistently, I think he's only had one injury in that time, and he's unplayable. Like, who's taking him out of the team right now? In all
No.
honesty, you think of Carter Vickers, you would always say the same of Carter Vickers. Nobody takes him out of the team, but with Liam Scales, there's what three other centre backs on the bench or in reserve that would be competing with him, but there's no sign of them taking him out of the team.
No.
So I think his criticism at times is very harsh. He's maybe a little limited in his game when it comes to his decision making and when to pass, when to dribble, and when to drive into space. But that's a tough ask to ask for Liam Scales. You look at his career, he was only playing university football a couple of years ago. It wasn't a long. He's had quite a sharp rise for playing in Irish football all the way to being a Celtic centre back starting week in, week out. I imagine he's not always played in possession dominant sides, and particularly Brendan Rodgers' style of play, what he wants the centre backs to do. So he's sort of learning on the job, and you can see that he's adapted to that over the course of the year. So for me, with Liam Scales, he's been great in adapting to a different system. Aberdeen, I think, played with a back five at times as well. He's played at left back, he's played in a back five as a left centre back. So playing it as a left centre back for Celtic in a back four with the full backs looking to bomb on, invert, overlap, it's been quite an adaptation period. And for me, he's been brilliant in that. And arguably, if he keeps up his form, he could be a contender for Player of the Year. I'm not saying he's going to win it, but he could be up there in the top 3 or 4 Celtic players.
Can you make the case, though, that it's a kind of Greg Taylor thing? It's like you always feel there's somebody better, but when they're showing that consistent form, you wouldn't have them out of the team. Because right now, when Carter Vickers comes back, it's not let's get Trusty in. It's Scales to me is not. You can't replace Scales at the moment, even though Trusty's come in with a big fee. Scales has been the better performer of the two. So to me, you can't take him out of the team, even though I think the long term plan is to try and get Trusty in there. So it's that you can't take him out because he's done nothing to deserve it.
Sometimes I think transfer values are overrated
Yeah.
and time actually in the first team picture. When you look at Scales, he's been in that first team for over a year. How much would Liam Scales be valued at, given his age? I know he's a wee bit older than you maybe hoped, but sometimes you look at a player, you spend 6 million, it doesn't mean they're going to start immediately. Same with Ida up front, 9 million. That doesn't. If you compared Ida's value and Kyogo is probably worth about double that. And then I'm not saying Scales is maybe worth double that. I don't know. Maybe I'm being harsh on him, but Trusty's not taking him out of the team. No way. Scales is built that relationship that's underrated in football. When you work alongside players, he knows what his teammates want to do. Cal McGregor, drop him deep to take the ball. Greg Taylor inverting. Carter Vickers alongside him. He knows Carter Vickers is there to take the ball if he's maybe in a tough situation. He's been working better with Kasper Schmeichel. I think Kasper Schmeichel's helped him a
I
lot.
agree with that.
Kasper Schmeichel's maybe harsh on Joe Hart. Joe Hart was brilliant towards the end of last season.
His
But
distribution is the big difference for me.
he's willing to take the ball in a
Yeah.
lot tougher situations. And I think with a player like Scales, he's maybe arguably one of the harshest players, being harsh on him. It's tough for him to take the ball and he can put it back to Kasper Schmeichel and that opens up space across
Yeah.
the pitch. So it makes him a better player. So for me with Scales, would Celtic need to spend even more money to get a better centre back? And are they arguably in that position to do that right now? It's not a position of necessity. It's fell back a little bit that they've spent money on Trusty. He's maybe third choice and he's an option if Carter Vickers or Scales gets injured. And then you look to left back. So for me, you're right, Scott. I think people's just been harsh on Liam Scales. He's proven people wrong time and time again, and I think he'll just continue to do that throughout his Celtic career.
Next question. We'll can I club these two together? What was the biggest takeaway from the Dortmund game, and can Brendan Rodgers change his approach for Atalanta? I think the biggest takeaway for me from Dortmund was how bad the ball retention was. Like, I know Dortmund were fighting, but the ball retention was abysmal. Like, that's the one thing that I left that game thinking.
I think that was down to Dortmund's pressing as well. Celtic's no faced a team that pressed that high and aggressively. Even Rangers maybe sometimes like to press Celtic quite high, but they can be passive. Whereas Dortmund were so aggressive and they forced them into the mistakes. For me, I look at the defensive shape when they're caught in the counter attack. They're at no man's land. You're maybe talking about 4v3, 4 Dortmund attackers v 3 Celtic defenders. The fullbacks are caught up the pitch. Callum McGregor's left in no man's land. They're pressing so high. And I think arguably that was in Rodgers to identify that after maybe 15, 20 minutes. But this is a thing in modern football. that people don't want to be pragmatic. Sometimes a lot of the managers have this philosophy, this style of play. For me, at times that gets a little bit overrated when you look at Carlo Ancelotti at Real Madrid and what he's been able to do at times to be a little bit more defensive and kind of pick your punches in European football, because you can't expect to go away to Dortmund and beat them playing the way Celtic were playing. You need to weather a few storms. You look at managers that have been successful in Europe for Celtic, Neil Lennon, Martin O'Neill, at times they were playing more pragmatic football. You maybe even look at Walter Smith with Rangers, they played more defensive.
Yeah.
So for me, there's an arrogance for Brendan Rodgers, and some of his comments post-match left a lot to be desired, and that if he was looking at the game beforehand again and he knew this was going to be the final result, would he change anything? And his answer was he wouldn't change anything at all. And the players he played, the style he played, I think it's just naive, given that he's conceded 7 goals in European football a number of times. That's a damning indictment. And I know they beat Slovan Bratislava, but you need to pick the opposition. And at times you just maybe need to go a bit more route one, because you're not going to beat Dortmund in that sort of attacking football, end-to-end basketball game. It was very clear that the Dortmund players, when they were pressed very high up the pitch, they were able to play through it.
Yeah.
And with Maeda, his goal comes out a little bit of luck. That's brilliance for Maeda. But it was just a defensive structure for me. It completely left them in no man's land. And I think on the night Dortmund were probably at their top level, but Celtic were so far below the level you would anticipate a team would need to be at to beat Dortmund. And given the fact that Rangers went to Dortmund a couple of years ago and were able to get that result with a more pragmatic style of play, and I know Dortmund have maybe they've improved since then. I don't really know. It's hard to judge where Dortmund are at because they're inconsistent domestically. So for me, it's frustrating to hear Rodgers say that he wouldn't be more pragmatic and maybe put on Anida, go route one, go a bit longer, use that counter attack in behind Maeda's pace, Kuhn's passing, Kyogo's running in behind. But when you look at the transfer window, it's clear that that's not what Rodgers wanted to do, or they would have brought in a physical holding midfielder. I think we all watched that game, and Callum McGregor, if you want to play him, he needs a bit more help in the middle of the park with someone that's maybe able to drop deep and play that position. I think Hatate in the second half, he made quite a difference in taking the ball. And for me, I think Hatate has that aspect to his game. But Celtic were missing a holding midfielder. And then at the same time, the instructions for Rodgers, I think, were naive and maybe arrogant against that Dortmund side.
And you mentioned something there, obviously, about Ida, and this was something that I took away as well for the game. And it was just times where there was, like, you looked at the highlights for the goals and you would see, like, a kind of bigger angle of the goal, for example, like a bigger camera angle, and Kyogo's just kind of standing in the centre circle, like in no man's land, and I thought, is he just kind of wasted in this type of game? Because I just felt as if he was trying to just make anything happen. He must have run. I would love to see how many kilometres he ran, but he just felt as if he was running to nothing. And I thought, do you bring Anida in and kind of go that kind of route one, as you say? And I just felt that game, there was a chance there to limit the. I don't think there was any way Celtic were going to get in from the game. Don't get me wrong, but there was no way it needed to be a 7-1. He could have changed it. And again, this kind of leads on to Atalanta, because probably just as a
great side.
Yeah. And if he does the same thing again, it could be another bad night.
I think a lot of people like to use is unlucky. They were clinical, but at the same time, you're giving them those chances due to your defensive frailties and your naivety to think the way you play against St Johnstone that have recently sacked our manager is going to work against Borussia Dortmund away from home in the Champions League. That's a Dortmund side that have turned up in the Champions League domestically, inconsistent, but in the Champions League they do turn up.
Got to a final the season before, and I know like people can say that's not.
They clearly understand what it takes to do it in European football,
yes.
And maybe they're struggling more domestically. But that happens. That's quite a tough thing to understand in football. That some teams, like you look at a Lyon as well, where they were sitting in Liga and they go to Ibrox and convincingly win. At times, teams thrive in European football and struggle domestically. Celtic are the epitome of the opposite of that. Celtic in European football, the approach is clearly wrong, and it's been wrong for a very long time. You maybe look back to Neil Lennon 2019-20, he had a bit of a better approach with a bit of luck with a great goalkeeper in Fraser Foster. Mm-hmm. And at times you've just got to admit that you're playing a better team. And
Mhm.
you look at any other sport like boxing, at times you've got to be more defensive. So you've just got to look at the opposition and work out a way. Did Celtic honestly believe they were going to press Dortmund that high and win the ball and break through them and score? And Dortmund wasn't going to do the same to Celtic, given Callum McGregor in that role in European football. I don't know. It was clear to see that he lacks that physicality and ability to win the ball. And even reading the game, I don't think that's Callum McGregor's greatest strength in that instance against Dortmund away. Rangers at home, he thrives in that atmosphere. Rangers away, but there's a big difference with playing a Rangers and the Borussia Dortmund. And it was clear to see that Celtic were quite a bit off it with the approach. But I think what the big frustration would be with Celtic fans and even Scottish football fans was that Celtic's approach was so far wrong in what they were looking to do away from home in European football. Because even teams like Arsenal, Man City, you see them at times, they maybe go a bit more passive in their play in European football because you've got to admit, when you go away to these teams, they're going to come and attack you for the outset.
Yeah, and this is one that came in a wee while ago, actually. This is one kind of for me. I don't know if you watched our prediction show, but every day kept asking who's going to be player of the year, and I kept saying Rio Atati gets a clean slate this season and isn't injured. He's going to be the player of the season, and he'll get his move in the summer. Is it safe to say he's in a mixed bag this season?
Yeah, very much the mixed bag with Rio Hatate. He sort of is that epitome of a midfielder who on his day is unplayable, but is he very often on his day? Do you know what I mean? Like, from in my opinion, if Rio Hatate is on the top of his form, he's the best player on the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
But how often do we see that? You can maybe count it in your hands how often he's at the very, very top of his game. He maybe has sevens, eights out of 10 now and again, but it's about that consistency. And I think that's a frustration for Rodgers, given the players that Rodgers worked with, your Steven Gerrards, your Coutinho's, your James Madisons. He knows what sort of midfielders can bring. And with Rio Hatate, it's the lack of consistency at times. But it's sort of like you look at an Olivier and Cham, he sort of did that as well at
Yeah.
times. Maybe he was even less consistent, but there seems to be this sort of mould of midfielders, and they will face that criticism. You look at people of a certain generation, they don't accept midfielders that sometimes are just completely off the game and they maybe look out of sorts. And football's sort of moved on with these sort of number eights that kind of do that. So with Hatate, it's hard to gauge where he'll go, but at times he'll get written off and he'll come back and fight back. So for me, that's why Celtic need a big squad because he needs to be rotated. I don't think he can play twice a week and be at the top of his game in both games. So for me, he's going to be in the bouts, but I wouldn't say he'll be player of the year.
No, I think he's got an uphill battle now, and again, it is just that case of like there's performances in there. Like again, I keep going back to this Bratislava game; he was excellent, and then
Definitely.
I thought against Rangers, he was really off it. Like those are the two kind of big performances. I thought Bratislava very good, Rangers off the pace. I think he should have started. I think just his ball retention and his passing range would have helped against Dortmund. He comes in and does okay when he comes on, but it's just finding that consistency, and he does need to find that. But we know what he's like when he's on it. He's magnificent. I always go back to that
Unplayable.
game last season against Hearts where, I mean, the pass. I think it was for Kyogo. That pass is probably one of the best passes you'll see all year last year. And he then picks up the injury, comes back in, and probably transforms Celtic season. I mean, they hit another gear when he come back in. He just needs to find that consistency, and if he does that, I think he's going to show why he could be a player of the year candidate. But to
That
me, it's an uphill battle now.
that's the problem with Celtic. I think we're sort of seeing a pattern with this, Scott, that a lot of players who's maybe not at the top of their game are kind of getting written off. And I
Yeah,
think with a lot of big football clubs, the fan bases can be quite toxic and write off these players. Like you talked about Arnie Engels, Hatate, Ida. They're sort of always kind of looking at players maybe to criticise. Whereas maybe you should just be praising the players that are absolutely excellent, like your Nicholas Kunz, your Dyson Maedas, your Alistair Johnsons, players like that are thriving. That doesn't mean you need to criticise other players that haven't reached that level quite yet at this stage of the season. For what, we're only in October, so you need to give these players a bit more time. Judge them at the end of the season. I think that's fair enough. So for me, the criticism at times a lot of these players are facing is quite harsh.
Nick. Final few questions here. Who that has left Celtic in the past two seasons would you take back and would fit into this side? I've got a very, very specific answer, but I'll let you go first here.
I think I'd go with Jota. I think Jota
Okay.
would bring that extra bit of dynamism. He would push the side on to another level, I think, with Dyson Maeda and even Nicholas Kuhn. He would be. Yeah, if you look at what those two are doing right now, Jota would be pushing them even more, I think. I think the options they have off the bench are pretty respectable. Players like James Forrest and that, but with Jota, he would push this side on another level. I think Brendan Rodgers would have loved a winger like him and what he was able to do, playing the right, playing the left. I don't think Jota would have needed much coaching under Rodgers. I think even with Ange got to a stage where Jota was just allowed the freedom to do what he wanted because he was quite hard working. So for me, I think Jota would have took this Celtic side up another gear again. And given they sold him for 25 million, I think that speaks for itself. He's not hit the ground running quite yet, but for me, with Jota and the form he left Celtic, his goal in the cup final against Inverness, he would have been a great player in a Celtic side.
You're the one that's sticking out to me, and the first person I thought of with the Dortmund game, Aaron Moy.
Aaron Moy, do
Just
you
his
think?
composure, just in in that kind of
Mhm.
difficult environment. I think under Ange, I think I go back to kind of Real Madrid and things like that, and think he was very very good in those games. Just where he's able to kind of pick up the ball when that press was high, he would have been a lot more calmer in the ball and a lot more composed. I think
That's
he,
experience, isn't it? It's as
yeah,
simple as that. He built up that career, he moves deeper. It's a natural progression for a midfielder like Aaron Moy to move that little bit deeper, give that support. That's exactly what you're right, Scott. That's exactly what I was meaning. A midfielder like that that looks to drop deep and give
hmm
Cal McGregor more support. So I would say he would have brought that experience to the Celtic side. And Brendan Rodgers, having worked with Steven Gerrard in the twilight of his career, he would have thrived in that as well.
yeah. I think Moy could have been an excellent fit for a Rodgers team. Do we need to talk about youth team and Lowland League? Is it safe to say that it's absolutely not worked and needs scrap?
It's certainly still not reached that level that anybody would be wanting to see with the amount of players coming into the Celtic side. Given how much they spent in the summer, you look at Kelly going to Millwall and he wasn't able to break into the first team. Rocco Vata as well leaving the club. It's quite frustrating, and the money that even East Kilbride's putting into the Lowland League, and they're clearly wanting to get into League Two. It can be quite late. Rangers leaving the league, I think, was a big moment for the Lowland League and Rangers making that big decision. For me, I don't really know where it goes in the next couple of years. It's actually quite hard to gauge what Celtic are getting out of this. In all honesty, there's obviously they're playing a lot of games and it's great for all these young players, but at the same point they reach a level and then they end up. I don't know. They end up in the lower leagues in England, League One, League Two. They start playing football there. That's maybe where their progression paths are. A lot of these players, they
Mhm.
maybe go to Austria. You've seen Celtic starting to use that market to loan players out. It's quite a level off where you would want these players to be at that stage of their career, and then they're pushed up to another level into League One. You look at Bosun Lawal, he went for the Lowland League to play in English football, and then he's quite a bit off it. You see the comments that Brendan Rodgers makes about him. It's quite a damning indictment of where the players are. I don't think that's anything to do with the coaching or anything like that. They're probably taught to play in a similar mould to what they're doing under Rodgers. But it's quite a level off what you would expect them to be playing at that stage of their career, and then they have to make the jump in the next couple of years into the first team.
I think the perfect example, like Mitchell. I watched a Celtic B team a couple of weeks ago, and Mitchell Frame was playing and looked okay. And all I could think of was 12 months ago, he's playing in the Champions League. How is he there? And then he's straight back down the pecking order. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a massive difference. I don't care what MD says. You can't go from playing fifth tier to the to that level. You can't. It's not the same, and
That's
it's
where the communication's breaking down as well, though. Do you know, think, Scott, with these
yeah.
players, these agents are getting in their ears. They're having fallen outs with the club about the wages and the expectations. I wouldn't say that's Celtic's fault that the B team's playing in the fifth tier.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any way that the Celtic B team's going to be playing in League One, League Two. In all honesty, but that's where the communication seems to be breaking down. That these players think they can go for playing fifth tier, as you say, all the way up to being in the first team picture, maybe off the bench, and given the jump. I maybe think sometimes the jump between the Championship and maybe League One isn't as big as people make out compared because you see teams maybe go back to back in a number of years. They go for playing in League One to playing in the Premiership.
hmm
But for me, going for playing in the Lowland League and then try to get in the Celtic first team picture, it's unbelievably difficult. And then players like Francis Turley, they're clearly identified to be being ahead of that level
Yeah.
already, and they're just kind of they're not playing as many games at that level as other players are, and that's quite harsh on the other players.
Well, look at like Daniel Cummins, for an example. I think he's sort of 10. I think I've seen it 10 goals in 9 games. I think in the B team, terrific numbers. But is that going to help him get towards the first team? Which is the ultimate, surely must be the ultimate goal. It must be the ultimate goal for any Celtic player to get to that first team. Doing that in the fifth tier, you're not. That's not going to get you a jump into the Celtics first team squad. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
And Sligo Rovers as well. I think that
yeah,
was quite a criticism that people were maybe want to see him in that game more involved. But that's what goes wrong as well. Fans get excited about these players doing great things in the Lowland League, and they
yeah.
maybe expect them to get that chance and off the bench maybe later towards the end of the season. But I just don't think that's going to happen. In all honesty, there's like so many more levels that they need to kind of meet criteria as achievements, objectives before they're even in the first team picture, whether it be a reserve player.
Final right. Second last question. Paulo Bernardo. How impressed have you been with him this season, and can he move on to be a key player at the end of the season?
I think you can. I think with these Celtic players, you look at them when they join the club, they maybe struggle to get the goals and assists right away, particularly in midfield. That's maybe a hard ask that these young players, your Matt O'Reillys, your Paulo Bernardos, that you don't expect them to get as many goals and assists. Whereas Bernardo's starting to get that instinct, that hunger to get those goals outside the box, inside the box. Rogers' coaching, I think, is vital in that. He's particularly excellent at taking midfielders up a level. So with Bernardo, he's pushing. He wasn't great against Dortmund in all honesty, but before that he was unbelievable against Falkirk in the
Mhm.
Premier Sports Cup against St Johnstone. That goal's exceptional outside the box. What a strike! So for me, Paulo Bernardo, he's only going to get better. I felt with him, he kind of showed glimpses last season of a player who was able to do things against Rangers, but then he wasn't doing it so much consistently against other domestic teams, and that's always quite hard to get to wrap your head around. How do these players make such an impact against Celtic's greatest competition domestically, but against other teams they struggle? And that's maybe an adaptation period. He gets a goal on the international break as well there. So for me with Paulo Bernardo, I think by the end of the season he very, very well could be one of the first names in the team sheet. He's got a great physicality about him. He's great at holding the ball, winning headers. He works hard for the team. So he's the sort of player that's just they're going to go strength to strength. He's going to get better and better. It's so exciting so early in the season to be seeing a midfielder get the goals, the assists. So with Rio Hatate, it's competition for him. Arne Engels, it's competition for him. So for me, by the end of the season, I probably do expect him to be in about the first team picture week in, week out, starting games. I don't mean on the bench, I mean starting games and really looking to, over the next 2 years, could he become one of Celtic's very
Yeah,
top players?
yeah. I think he's the obviously thing about him is he's probably the one apart. McGregor's obviously really kick in terms of adding goals to his game, but Bernardo's capable of scoring. Do you know what I mean? Outside the box, how many goals has he scored? Like, do you know what I mean? Like thunderbolts. That helps you kind of crack on as well. But you look at him against Dortmund and you thought, right, is he capable at this level? But again, that Dortmund game's so hard to
With all these
analyse.
players as well, I think all these players they're all going to get criticised
Yeah,
probably, maybe some more than others. But for me, that's down to the manager and the approach, and it's on his back because these players are going to get harshly criticised. Rogers will get criticised as well,
but
rightly, for what he
you
done.
look at the Rangers game, for example, he's absolutely full of energy. The Rangers midfield really didn't have an answer for him. And
I know
it shows you,
exactly.
doesn't it? Yeah, like I just think his energy, the ability he's got. I think it doesn't look to me to be the kind of technical. It looks to me to be a classic example of someone that you wouldn't really necessarily say he's got a flat out position in a midfield, but he can do everything. And that to me is just he's just going to get better with time. In terms of the kind of final question, is there a danger of complacency from a domestic point of view? Now, the reason that gets brought up, that's a question from me because I look at this Celtic team right now and think they're miles ahead of Rangers. Celtic and Rangers isn't even a contest at the moment. But is there a danger that when you look at that, like 5 points just now, I think it's insurmountable. But you saw against Ross County, Celtic weren't at it. And is there a danger if you have two or three more performances like that? can kind of form dip, can levels dip when you're focusing in Europe? Because these kind of 8 games are all important. You're in the semi final of a cup. Even though Celtic are leaps and bounds ahead, is there a chance of complacency? Like, how do you avoid that?
I think it's fatigue, in all honesty. When I look at it, you're coming to the end of the second international break coming up. So now we're in the second international break. For me, it was fatigue against Ross County,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not just physical exhaustion; that's mental exhaustion. Any athlete to suffer that sort of defeat, 7-1,
Yeah,
that nature, the convincing that you're just completely so far out the game, they were just every aspect of the game was just no good at all. And then to travel to Ross County, and I'm bringing up a lot of aspects that maybe people think is maybe excuses, but for me, all these things all go together, and they sort of have that detrimental effect. The travelling to Ross County at that time for the game, for me, it was Ross County. I think were up for the game as well. Credit to Ross County. Any team who gives Celtic a game domestically deserve credit for the gaps in finances.
yeah,
For me, I don't think Rodgers would let that complacency set in. It was like last season, he was able to turn them for a team that was quite far off it to the end of business end of the season. That's not a coincidence that a manager like Brendan Rodgers was able to get them over the line. So for me, he's not going to accept that complacency, no way at all. And it's very clear that Brendan Rodgers, this second time at Celtic, he's got the support and the backing with the board, financially speaking, and what he was able to do in the transfer market. You look at this, the people they're bringing into the club, the football doctor. I don't know if you've seen much about that, Scott.
yeah,
But
seen that.
clearly, Brendan Rodgers, people in England that he's built relationships up with when he was working down there, he's bringing his people into this Celtic side. And I'm talking about in the background, maybe more positions that people don't really want to look into too much. But for me, everything's built around Brendan Rodgers and what he can do here in this second spell. And I think it'll be European football that judges him. But at the same time, you're right that that Ross County performance was quite a level off what would they come to expect. But are they falling a downfall of their own success at the same time because they've reached such a high level? You talk about you think they were so far ahead of Rangers given the performances, which is correct. So at the same time, that's up to Rodgers, the coaching staff, to make sure that they can keep that level. But at the same time, I think the squad depth is going to get them through this. Coming out of the transfer window, I think at worst they had greater squad depth, and at best they've improved the squad
Mm-hmm.
given the quality. So for me, the squad depth will be able to get them through a tough period. That doesn't mean they're going to win every game domestically. There won't be a defeat, maybe here or there. And I think at Celtic, you can't expect them to win every game week in, week out domestically. There's going to be the odd slip ups, particularly games away from home, or maybe games at home where oppositions put in a great defensive performance. So for me, it's up to Rodgers to make sure there's no complacency. And I don't think he would let that set in one bit, given what he was able to do last season. Because I think that was when I had the biggest doubts around Brendan Rodgers last
Yeah.
season, when he went through that slump in form. And it was popping up quite often. It wasn't as if it happened over 2 games and then you never seen it. It happened quite a bit. And then towards the end of the season, it completely sort of disappeared. He was able to win so many big games that I don't think anybody would have anticipated between December and February that Celtic were going to go on to win the double.
No, no. And you mentioned obviously the football doctor. That's Paul Tisdale.
Yeah,
That's a kind of
but
different feel of like recruitment into it. It's not like a head of recruitment. I hope his title's not foot. What was the? I hope his title's not football doctors. Remember the Terry McDermott thing? What was it? Director of fun or something? I hope it's not that. But it does speak of like a Brendan Rodgers type. This is like I don't know if it's Brendan Rodgers that specifically wants this guy, but it doesn't seem to me to be that kind of nepotism feel that I got with Mark Law, which is I want my son in just to do something, so we'll make him head of recruitment. Whereas I think Rodgers has maybe identified somebody to come in and do a bunch of different things.
it's so with Rodgers, it's very specific what he wants a football club
Yeah,
to be like. Like he doesn't want a football club to be like a Liverpool or a Man City. That Man City will appoint all the people above him that he's going to work with. I think with Rodgers, and that's down to Dermot Desmond. It was Dermot Desmond that brought Brendan Rodgers back
yeah,
to the club. He made that decision. You'll not see a lot of football clubs maybe in British football that the owner flat out appoints the
yeah.
manager over the chairman's decision, the chief executive. So for me, I think it's someone that Rodgers has identified that he can work with and will make Celtic a better team. And hopefully, in all honesty, it couldn't get any worse than the recruitment last
No,
summer. And I think we've seen a lot of players that Rodgers has identified since then. It was very clear that he identified them, and he did speak kindly the recruitment team that is there now, the people that's still left. There's not a lot left for last season,
No.
but he's clearly working well with certain people and bringing in Paul Tisdale we talk about. And I think it's only going to be a positive, and it shows that Celtic's beginning to work in alignment, but it's not the typical football model
No.
the director of football, the sporting director. It's more sort of the manager works so closely with people that he knows, and he's just given free rein by those at the top of the club. And given how the first spell went with Brendan Rodgers and the way he left the club, we're not going to see that happen again. It's so obvious now that Brendan Rodgers has made it clear to the Celtic board what's went wrong even last season in the summer recruitment and how things are going to go forward in a direction that's quite positive. Like I don't have any worries about any of this at all. I just think things are going in the right direction upstairs with Rodgers. He's getting that support that he didn't have the first time round.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's keen to see what position Paul Disdale gets when he eventually does get appointed. But I think overall, apart like obviously you can look at Dom and think it was a bit of a bad night, but I think overall as we wrap up, I think looking at Celtic right now in this international break, I think domestically it's been absolutely spot on, and I think the club's in a really good position at the moment.
Yeah, and also I think Peter Lawler made a big statement about that, speaking about how much money has actually been invested in the first team. And I think given inflation, getting a wee bit economic with those terms there, but with Celtic that they've been spending more money over the past year and a bit now, and they're starting to make that jump in European football. That's the challenge now. European football, if Celtic don't adapt to this modern Super League sort of image that they're portraying with the league table, they're going to get caught and they're going to end up, I don't maybe even end up in the Europa League if they don't adapt. So that's the challenge for Celtic right now. They need to be able to stay in the Champions League format over the next couple of years. The coefficient, getting those wins domestically, other teams like Hearts and Rangers getting wins in European football is vital for keeping these clubs and financially not getting caught behind other leagues, because the TV rights you see in Scottish football, it's not enough for the product, I think, at times, with the quality that these teams are actually bringing. So for me, Celtic's in a very positive position. You look at the money, even getting invested in the women's team, the B team, the new facilities that's getting built, and that's obviously cost Celtic a lot of money. A lot of people don't really speak about that. The women's coach, Elena, as well, I think she's done a great job getting them into Champions League. So it doesn't always mean you're going to see that at the first team level right away, but there's other parts of the football club that people I don't think want to talk about a lot, which is fair because they're obviously not looking into it, but there's a lot of parts of the club that you see that positivity coming. There's not so much criticism for the fan base, but that's obviously likely to pop up now and again. But for me, there's a lot of positives that people aren't really looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think obviously right now Celtic in a really good position, and we've kind of went through a lot there, Michael. It's really been good to get kind of your thoughts on a lot of things as well. And again, kind of these questions, I enjoyed that. So thank you very much for doing that, mate. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, no problem. It was great to speak about Celtic, especially when things are pretty positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will be back on a more regular basis going forward, so stay tuned for that. Thank you very much, folks, for all your questions, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.